The scent of lemon polish and old money clung to the air, a perfume I'd never associated with home until last spring. It was the smell of their sudden return, a scent that still, even now, makes my teeth ache. They drifted back into my life like a fog rolling in from the coast, their faces a familiar, yet alien landscape etched with a new kind of expectancy. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first, like the almost silent creak of a floorboard under a heavy foot, announcing a presence that hadn't been there moments before. For years, I'd been the black sheep, the one who'd taken a wrong turn somewhere in her 20s and never found her way back to the gilded path. My siblings, bless their perfectly curated lives, were constants. They were the sturdy oak trees in the family garden, their roots deep and their branches spreading wide, providing shade and a sense of permanence. While I was the wildflower that stubbornly grew in the cracks of the pavement, resilient and overlooked, pushing through the sterile uniformity. We saw each other at holidays, strained affairs filled with polite inquiries about my job, always vague, always met with thinly veiled pity that pricked like nettles, and proud pronouncements of their own successes. Promotions, new homes, the effortless accumulation of everything I, in their eyes, clearly lacked. My parents, retired and comfortable, offered a quiet disappointment, a gentle sigh that carried more weight than any shouted accusation. It was a familiar ache, a dull throb in the chest that never quite went away. I learned early on not to expect much. My contributions were footnotes, my opinions disregarded, like discarded paper scraps swept under the rug. I was the quiet one, the one who observed. And I observed a lot. I saw the way my brother always steered conversations towards his investments, his voice laced with a particular kind of self-importance. I saw the way my sister's eyes would light up, a greedy glint in them, when she spoke of her husband's latest acquisition, a new yacht or a weekend villa. I saw the subtle nods of approval from my parents, a shared understanding that flowed between them, excluding me. It was a performance, a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their roles, and I, apparently, was cast as the forgotten understudy, forever waiting in the wings for a cue that never came. The silences between their pronouncements felt vast, an expanse I was meant to fill with apologetic murmurs, but I found myself content to simply watch. Then a number. A sequence of digits that seemed impossible, like a glitch in the matrix, a break in the mundane fabric of reality. It happened on a Tuesday, a day like any other, filled with the usual drab commute, the stale air of the office, and lukewarm coffee that tasted faintly of burnt plastic. I checked the ticket on my phone, my fingers numb with disuse. Then I checked it again, my heart beginning a frantic, irregular rhythm. And again. It wasn't a mistake. It was a seismic shift, a tectonic plate moving beneath the foundations of my mundane existence, a tremor that sent ripples through my very being. The immediate urge was to shout, to run, to tell everyone, to shatter the carefully constructed silence that had defined my life. But the years of being overlooked, of being treated as less than, had instilled a deep caution, a habit of self-preservation that had become second nature. I simply didn't. I closed the app, a strange calm settling over me, a deceptive stillness before a storm. The first few weeks were a blur of quiet decisions, legal advice that felt both surreal and liberating, and the disorienting sensation of wealth as a tangible, yet invisible, force. It was a power I'd never known, a key that unlocked doors I hadn't even realized existed. I sold my tiny apartment, its cramped walls a symbol of my previous limitations, paid off my debts with a casual wave of a checkbook, a gesture that felt utterly foreign and exhilarating, and began searching. Not for a modest house, not for something sensible that fit my old life. I found a place that was utterly absurd, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, a place that belonged in a magazine, a place that screamed success louder than any billboard. It had manicured gardens, a private drive lined with ancient oaks, and a silence that was profound, not empty but full. I hired a discreet interior designer, a woman who understood the unspoken language of opulence, whose gaze seemed to pierce through superficiality. We talked about marble, about custom cabinetry that flowed like water, about a library that could house a small university, its shelves waiting for stories to fill them. I was building a fortress, yes, but more importantly, I was building a statement, a testament to a life lived on my own terms. The news, of course, spread like wildfire. Not how it happened, just the result, whispered behind cupped hands and curious glances. I'd done well for myself, they said, their voices laced with a newfound respect, a curious blend of awe and suspicion that made me want to laugh. The calls started first, a barrage of ringing phones. My mother, her voice a pitch higher than usual, a nervous tremor running through it. My father asking about my investments, a term he'd never used in relation to me before. My siblings, their invitations arriving with alarming frequency, like migrating birds returning to their nest. A weekend brunch here, a casual dinner there. Each one a meticulously planned operation to re-engage with this newfound gravitational pull. The first time they visited the house, it was like watching a nature documentary unfold, the silent observation of creatures in their natural habitat. The wide eyes, the hushed whispers as they took in the soaring ceilings, the art that was far more valuable than their cars, the grounds that stretched out like a private kingdom. My brother, who usually scoffed at anything that wasn't a blue-chip stock, ran his hand over the polished granite countertop, a look of bewildered respect on his face, as if he'd stumbled upon an alien artifact. My sister, who had once criticized my thrift store finds with a dismissive sniff, now circled the dining room table, her gaze lingering on the custom chandelier, its crystals catching the light like captured stars. Even my parents, who had always possessed a quiet dignity, seemed a little less reserved, a little more impressed, their usual stoic composure softening. They stayed longer than they usually did, their visits stretching into afternoons, then into whole days. The subtle digs, the thinly veiled criticisms, the gentle reminders of my perceived shortcomings, were replaced by a palpable desire to be near this new gravitational pull, to bask in its reflected glow. They asked about my future, my plans, their questions now tinged with a flattering eagerness to be included, to be privy to the inner workings of my new success. They reminisced about old times, carefully curated memories where I was less of an outcast and more of a quirky relative, a slightly eccentric but ultimately loved member of the family tapestry. The wildflower was suddenly the prize-winning orchid, suddenly worthy of admiration. It was during one of these visits, as they were oohing and awing over the wine cellar, a room I'd only ever seen in pictures before, a testament to a life of leisure I'd never known, that I realized the truth. Their reappearance wasn't about me. It wasn't about genuine affection rekindled after years of neglect. It was about the house. It was about the lifestyle. It was about the reflection of their own perceived success, now amplified by my own good fortune, a mirror held up to their own ambitions. They hadn't seen me, the person, the quiet observer, for years. They'd seen a projection of their own expectations, a narrative they'd written for me. Now they saw a new, even more dazzling projection, one they wanted to bask in, to absorb, to claim a part of. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no grand pronouncement, no tearful confrontation that would have only served to perpetuate the old dynamic. It was a quiet, internal click, a subtle realignment of my own inner compass. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I had built this brick by magnificent brick, through sheer unadulterated luck and a lifetime of keeping my head down, of quietly persevering. Their sudden interest was a form of subtle manipulation, a parasitic need to orbit a brighter star, a reflex born of entitlement rather than genuine love. So I started saying no, gently, politely but firmly, like a well-placed velvet rope. No, I couldn't make it to their impromptu barbecue, a sudden gathering that felt suspiciously orchestrated. No, I wouldn't be able to join them for their usual summer vacation, a tradition I'd always felt like an outsider to. The invitations to my house, however, became more frequent, more insistent, like a persistent hum that refused to be ignored. I began scheduling my own commitments during those times, creating my own narrative of busyness and engagement. A quiet reading session in my new library, the scent of old paper filling the air. A long walk through the meticulously manicured gardens, the birdsong my only companion. The silence within the estate, once a sanctuary, became a deliberate barrier, a conscious choice to cultivate my own space. The real shift happened when my sister, emboldened by a glass of my rather expensive champagne, a vintage I'd selected for its complexity and depth, brought up a childhood grievance, a perceived slight from years ago, a forgotten incident that had festered in her memory. She expected me to fall into my old apologetic role, to cower and offer justifications. Instead, I simply met her gaze, a faint, unreadable smile on my lips, like the first hint of dawn. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? I said, my voice even, devoid of the usual defensiveness. We've both changed. The air in the room thickened, becoming heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. She blinked, taken aback by the lack of expected defensiveness, her carefully constructed scenario dissolving before her eyes. My brother, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, a subtle but undeniable change in the family dynamic, quickly changed the subject, his usual suave demeanor faltering. My parents exchanged a worried glance, a silent communication passing between them, a recognition that the game had changed. The comfortable illusion they'd built around my newfound wealth, and their rediscovered proximity to it, began to crumble at the edges, revealing the fragility beneath. The whispers started then, not about my lottery win, the catalyst for their renewed attention, but about me. "She's changed," they'd say, their tone a complex mix of disapproval and grudging respect, like a judge acknowledging an opponent's skill while still condemning their actions. "She's become so private." My brother hinted at my supposed new friends, who were influencing me, implying a negative impact on my character. My sister complained that I was unreachable, my carefully cultivated solitude a source of frustration. My parents for the first time seemed genuinely confused, their attempts to guide and shape me now met with an unexpected resistance. They had expected me to be their grateful recipient, a convenient extension of their own social standing, a trophy to be displayed. Instead, they found a woman who had outgrown them, a woman who no longer needed their approval, a woman who was perfectly content in her own very large solitude. The invitations to their home stopped arriving, replaced by a palpable silence, a void where there had once been constant outreach. The calls became less frequent, the tone colder, more formal, like a business transaction rather than a family connection. The expectancy that had once been so blatant, so eager in their eyes, was replaced by a flicker of annoyance, then a grudging acceptance, a dawning realization that their influence had waned. They still spoke about my house, of course, the subject a persistent undercurrent in their infrequent conversations, but now it was with a hint of bitterness, a sense of being shut out, of having lost access to something they felt entitled to. The lemon polish and old money scent of their renewed presence had faded, leaving behind the quiet, enduring fragrance of my own chosen peace. I had kept my secret, the secret of my own contentment, and in doing so I had reclaimed myself piece by precious piece.